Hello, my name is Jim. Welcome to my booktube channel about books, reading and stuff. In this video I want to look at the great American novel, and later in the video I'll tell you what I think is the great American novel. The idea of a great American novel was coined in an essay by John William de Forest in 1868. 1868 was just shortly after the American Civil War and after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and people were looking for something to hold on to move forward. John William de Forest said that at that time there wasn't a great American novel, although one contender he argued could be Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, but this was an idea that's waxed and waned in American literature ever since the great American novel. There is no general consensus on which novel or novels merit the title of the great American novel. In other countries, in France and Britain, it's not this concept of the great French novel or the great British novel. There's been some talk in Australia about finding the great Australian novel, but this is very linked to America, the great American novel. When I did my alphabetic tags, the A tag, I asked, what is the great American novel? And I got several responses. The most popular was more of my fellow booktubers put The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as their choice for the great American novel, if such a beast existed. Many other. This one, The Great Gatsby, this was suggested by Rowan of We Damage We and Air and Faces, the great American novel. What is the great American novel? There are several interpretations of what constitutes a great American novel. It has to capture the essence of America. It has to encompass the entire nation, not just one particular area. Suggestions of The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne were dismissed because it's more like the great New England novel. It's set in New England, it's very much focused on that part of America, and America's a vast expanse of country. It must be democratic in spirit and form. Steve Donahue suggested if there was such a thing as a great American novel, there should be a different one for each century. He suggested for the 19th century it would be Moby Dick, which is a popular choice for the great American novel. Moby Dick is steeped into American culture, and even if you haven't read Moby Dick, you know something about the story. Also, Gregory Peck played Captain Ahab in the film Moby Dick. Gregory Peck also played Atticus Finch in the film To Kill a Mockingbird, another title that's often cited as the great American novel. For the 20th century, Steve Donahue suggested House of Mirth, and for the 21st century, The Last Samurai. Gina Stania had the great American novel on her shelves and she held it up. But this is a book by Philip Roth called The Great American Novel. And proclaiming your book as the great American novel might somehow exclude it. A lot of the candidates for the great American novels weren't highly acclaimed when they came out. Moby Dick was not a great success until after Herman Melville's death. Herman Melville in his lifetime was far more successful with his early novels like Typee, about travel in the South Seas. Other suggestions included Gone with the Wind, the great novel of the American South. Pay at Attention suggested Kafka's Amerika. One stipulation for most people about the great American novel is it should be written by someone born in America, or at least someone who adopted America as their country. And Franz Kafka never set foot in America, despite his first novel being called Amerika. Another suggestion, Fahrenheit 451. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Many of the suggestions for the great American novel were written by white males, like Steinbeck, Fitzgerald, Herman Melville, etc. Gertrude Stein felt that she would be excluded from writing the great American novel because of her Jewish culture, because of her gender, and because of her homosexuality. One other book often considered for the great American novel is Beloved, Toni Morrison. This is a lot about the African American experience. David Wiley suggested the Vinland sagas. There's also Jordan Parsons suggested Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon, and Underworld by Don DeLillo is another choice. There have been many different novels cited as potentially being the great American novel, and many of my fellow booktubers says that there isn't a great American novel, or we can't choose between them, because it's like chasing this great white whale. Literary history changes with time, and maybe in the future we'll be looking back for the great American narrative. In this day and age, we get a lot of narratives from TV series, more so perhaps than novels, and maybe the great American narrative will be something like The Wire or Breaking Bad. I have my own contender for the great American novel, but you can tell from my accent I'm not American. I was born in London. This accent is a weak London accent. I was born in London, I grew up in Slough, but then I've lived in many places, and I haven't lived in London or the home counties since the beginning of the 90s. I now live in Georgia, but not Georgia in America. I live in this Georgia. Well, not Soviet Georgia, but post-Soviet Georgia. The Georgia that borders on Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan and Turkey, and we're a little bit worried about Putin at the moment, as I think everybody is. My candidate for the great American novel is this, East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I'm rereading this. I'm really enjoying it on my reread. The first quarter of the novel, most of it I'd forgotten. I read it 30 years ago, but it has a great sweep over America. It starts in the east, in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and goes over to California, to Salinas, the Salinas Valley. It does, at the beginning there's a great description of the Salinas Valley, but characters, it's a big family saga, a multi-generational family saga. It starts in the Civil War times. Cyrus Trask saw very little action in the American Civil War, but he played this up. He played the expert armchair general and met with many important figures in the army, and he even met with the vice president and the president to advise them on military affairs. There's a lot of irony in this novel, East of Eden. It's a family saga. It's about two families, the Trasks and the Hamiltons. East of Eden mentions the Native Americans, or the Indians as they were known then. Adam Trask had enlisted into the army, and he was involved in the Plains Wars. He didn't like fighting. He was a sharpshooter, but he used his skills to avoid shooting people if he could. He says, by this time the Indian fighting had become like dangerous cattle drives. The tribes were forced into revolt, driven and decimated, and the sad, sullen remnants settled on starvation lands. It was not nice work, but given the pattern of the country's development, it had to be done. In these times where Roe v. Wade is under threat, in East of Eden, Kathy Ames conducts a primitive abortion on herself, or attempts a primitive abortion on herself with a knitting needle. She doesn't succeed in the abortion, and she almost kills herself. It's also part of the essence of America. American novels need a lot of symbolism and allusion. There's the biblical allusions in East of Eden, Eden being the original garden, and one of the central characters being Adam Trask, trying to turn the Salinas Valley, his property there, into a garden if he can get the water. East of Eden was popular with the public on its release, but it wasn't popular with the critics. They thought it was heavy-handed and they didn't like the biblical allusions. One of the criticisms of Mark Twain as well for the great American novel is it's too popular. It was not highbrow enough for the critics to be considered the great American novel. In the comments, you can let me know what you think is the great American novel, or if you think there is no great American novel. My suggestion is The East of Eden, which I think is a fantastic novel, and I'm really enjoying rereading it at the moment. If you enjoyed this video, you can like and subscribe below, and I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.